Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I understand we're in morning business, up to 10 minutes.
Senator is correct.
I'd ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, what we are debating in the United States Senate is about fighting for the economic future of America. Dr. King talked about the fierce urgency of now in the context of the struggle for civil rights. Well, we have to remember the fierce urgency of now when we are tackling the worst economic crisis our country has seen in generations. We have to understand the urgency for the 3.6 million Americans who lost their jobs since December of 2007. Almost 600,000 in the last month alone. It's an urgent situation when millions of American families are in danger of losing their home. It's a dire situation when state budgets are stretched so thin they have to watch school buildings crumble. It's an emergency situation when local communities are forced to consider cutting police or firefighters who protect their residents. It's an immediate crisis when a young girl needs an operation, but her parents can't afford health insurance. The Dow lost 40% in a year's time. Businesses are closing. Life savings are being drained. And even for the hard-working Americans who still have their jobs, pensions, and health care, there's still a lot of fear out there that their careers and health insurance aren't secure, that the job loss or foreclosure that hit their neighbor will knock on their door next. And so yet, in the midst of all of that, I hear so many of my colleagues basically say, oh no, do nothing. Without bold and decisive action, the country faces the possibility of a prolonged economic collapse, rivaling the worst we have ever seen. In a crisis this severe, the federal government has the responsibility to step in, to stabilize the economy, lay the groundwork for recovery. And we're not just talking about the financial recovery of individuals. We're talking about the renewal of a nation. We have before us a tremendous opportunity to strengthen the 21st century economy, to make investments so the private sector can create the innovations that will help our country prosper in the future, to transition away from fossil fuels and stop sending our money abroad, and enhance America's energy security and meet the climate crisis that threatens our planet. We have an opportunity very soon to vote on a bold plan to create and maintain more than 3.5 million jobs in America, 100,000 in my home state of New Jersey, helping workers damaged by this crisis and laying the foundations for economic growth well into the future. Is the bill we're considering perfect? No, but in my many years of legislating, I've never seen a perfect bill. But people are losing their jobs, their homes, and their life savings. The unemployment rate in New Jersey is the highest it's been in a decade and a half. More Americans are filing first-time jobless claims than any time in a quarter of a century. This isn't a time for delay. It isn't a time for gains or political posturing. It's time for quick, bold action. Now, this is a complicated piece of legislation, so let me take a little time to lay out its most important provisions. First, this bill brings tax relief to the middle class, about $230 billion worth of tax cuts. In the Finance Committee, I'd introduced an amendment to save over 1 million New Jerseyans from the alternative minimum tax, saving families up to $5,600. That tax was originally designed to ensure that the wealthiest Americans couldn't use creative accounting to avoid all taxes, but it was never intended to hit the middle class as hard as it's hitting them now. And if we don't act, millions of taxpayers could wake up next tax season to realize they owe more in taxes even though their income hasn't changed. The cornerstone of this legislation in terms of tax relief is making work pay and the credit that is available to those who are working. The average working family, 95% of all working families, is going to get a tax cut of up to $800. to put money back into people's pockets so they can pay their bills, support their families, and at the same time create demand in this economy for goods and services that will be provided largely by the private sector that creates other jobs for those who provide those goods and services. It expands the earned income and child tax credit to help low-income working families get through these difficult times. And those are the individuals who, again, need money, and when they have that money, they spend it in an economy that also creates demands for goods and services created largely by the private sector. In fact, 90% of all of the jobs that will be created under this bill will be from the private sector. And it supports tax incentives for businesses to make new investments and hire new employees. And this recovery package won't just create jobs, it'll create a new generation of green jobs. What we're considering today is a green recovery package, which will help change the direction of our economy from one based on fossil fuel to one based on clean, renewable energy. The package makes important investments in building efficiencies, in renewable fuels, in clean vehicles, in green job training. It makes a massive investment in weatherizing homes, which will reduce emissions while bringing down energy costs. And all along the way, each of those initiatives creates a different sector of the job marketplace that Americans will be able to fulfill. Just like the rest of it, the energy piece of this legislation isn't perfect. I would have liked to have seen, for example, more support for mass transit. Mass transit systems are facing major budget crises. They have to consider severe cutbacks, just as ridership is growing and climate change is accelerating. Transit funding is essential if we're going to meet our emissions goals, get cars off the street, keep efficient transportation affordable. The federal government has been dragging its feet on energy security and climate change for too long. But in the meantime, however, our local governments have been leading the way. And that's why I'm proud to have created the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants in 2007, along with Senator Sanders, to help fund and reward that work. And I'm thrilled that this Economic Recovery Act contains substantial funding for these grants, including tens of millions of dollars for New Jersey. Cities and communities across the country can use the funding to promote efficiency, lower greenhouse gas emissions, invest in renewable energy, and the jobs that will go along with that in doing that work. A municipality could work to insulate office buildings, install fluorescent light bulbs, install solar panels, invest in LED lighting for traffic signals, or purchase more efficient municipal vehicles. Of course, what a municipality would do for energy efficiency in New Jersey would be different from what it might do, I should say, in Alaska or Arizona, so the funding allows for flexibility. There's strong support, for example, for solar energy, including a manufacturing tax credit and tax incentives for homeowners to install solar panels. That's good news for New Jersey, the second biggest solar producing state in the country, and the state where the solar cell was actually invented. The support for energy efficiency is complemented by important investments in infrastructure. With this recovery plan, we can start building and rehabilitating scores of roads, bridges, and bypasses. We have the chance to secure a stream of funding to start construction on the new Trans-Hudson Rail Tunnel, to ease commutes across the Hudson River, reduce traffic, and clean our air. Most importantly, these kinds of projects, I should say, put people to work. Not only the construction people, but the engineers, the architects, the clerical work in their office, everybody who creates the supplies for these jobs at their places of work, the transportation system that brings it to the job site. This is how we create all of these jobs, and mostly in the private sector. We understand that a major part of helping the economic recovery is allowing workers who lost their jobs to keep their families afloat, develop the skills necessary to maintain long-term employment and find new jobs. This economic recovery package makes exactly this type of bold investment. It helps states close gaps in their unemployment programs. It rewards states for innovative reforms, providing benefits to more than 500,000 workers a year who are now falling through the cracks of the unemployment program. And it stimulates the broader economy, as every dollar put in the hands of temporarily displaced workers and their families generates $1.64 in economic growth, whether it's spent on housing, groceries, or other basic necessities. And for those who have fallen on the hardest of times, who've been laid off, haven't been able to find new work and are having trouble putting food on the table or keeping a roof overhead, the recovery package includes important support for food assistance, as well as housing programs that will help prevent foreclosures, rehabilitate homes, and provide emergency housing. And this legislation that we talk about as not only recovery but investment, this legislation also means about $4 billion for worker training and employment services. The labor market has fundamentally changed. And we're going to stay competitive in our state and in our country if we invest in human capital and give our workers the skills to thrive in the 21st century economy. Preparing those students and workers, and those who will prepare them for the high-tech, high-paying jobs, means investing in education at every level. And that is also not only going to lay the foundation for long-term economic growth, but give immediate opportunities for jobs as well. So these are ways in which we, in fact, can modernize our schools. At least 205 New Jersey schools will have the opportunity to modernize themselves, put the technology necessary and the laboratories necessary for preparation for this 21st century economy. It's a difference between a crumbling schoolroom and a science lab that prepares a child for a career in biomedical engineering. Now, I was raised in a tenement, poor, son of immigrants, first in my family to go to college. I know that I wouldn't be standing here in the United States Senate today if it wasn't for those opportunities, whether that was at our public education program or in college through the Pell Grants and the opportunities and the American Opportunity Tax Credit to make college more affordable. That's going to produce a workforce that ultimately can compete anywhere in the world and be able to capture the new jobs that will be created under this bill. And finally, any parent in America knows the challenges of affording health care, even if you haven't lost your job. Families working in low-wage or even moderate-wage jobs struggle every month just to pay the bills, not to mention the medical bills on top of that. And those who have recently lost jobs are pretty much out of luck. Unfortunately, a child's illness doesn't always wait for a good-paying job with health care to come along. And that's why we've included provisions in this bill to help states continue to provide health coverage to those children and families they're serving. And for those who lost their job and their health insurance with it, we've included a tax break to help them pay for the COBRA coverage they're eligible for in between jobs. And I'll end where this whole crisis began, in housing. This bill includes provisions that will allow more families to get tax relief when they buy a home, provide additional funding for those who have recently lost their home, and funding for a provision I authored to help children affected by a home foreclosure stay in the school. This plan may be detailed, the investments it makes may be diverse, but we're not just talking about throwing money out haphazardly. We understand that every dollar in this plan belongs to the American taxpayer. They deserve assurances that their money is invested wisely. So we're going to ensure unprecedented transparency, oversight, and accountability in this plan, so Americans can see not only how their money is being spent, but the results of their investments. And this includes requiring the President to report quarterly on the plan's progress, as well as establishing an oversight panel to review the management of taxpayer dollars. Now, we've had a vigorous debate in this legislation. That's part of our democracy, and it's always welcomed. But it's been extremely troubling to me to see such a bad case of amnesia in some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I think it would make every American who's lost his or her job in this recession cringe to hear that some of my Republican colleagues want to repeat the policies that helped create this crisis in the first place. Republican policies dominated the last president over the last 8 years and dominated Congress for a good part of that period of time. All of a sudden, they are guardians of fiscal responsibility. After taxing the middle class while passing capital gains and dividends tax cuts aimed at the wealthy. After turning President Clinton's record surpluses into President Bush's record deficits and doubling the national debt to more than $11 trillion. $11 trillion. If we did absolutely nothing, if President Obama did absolutely nothing, he will have inherited a $1.2 trillion debt. And so I hear these voices now of fiscal responsibility. Where were they when they were driving this enormous deficit to the nation. And now, to top it all off, they added amendment after amendment that adds to the debt. And then they turn around after adding to the debt and complaining about it and voted against the package because they say it adds too much to the federal debt. Only in Washington can one believe that. Finally, Mr. President, I hope that our Republican colleagues aren't of the belief that by hoping this package doesn't succeed, they will achieve political victory. Because in essence, they'd be voting and betting against an American economic recovery, against the American people's hopes and dreams and aspirations to live a better life. And I fear, after reading some of the articles today, that that's exactly where they are. No plan to meet the economic challenges we have, complain about the plan that is there, and then ultimately find ourselves in a set of circumstances in which they are betting against the American people and this economic recovery. That's not only bad politics, it is bad policy for the nation. I hope they will see the light when it comes time to vote. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.